Welcome to Mission Undercover. Joining me today are Sumrow and Robby Cobbs. They are members of Tech My School, an organization dedicated to giving students the best possible education, regardless of their circumstances. They help schools leverage technology to deliver the best possible outcomes. We are going to discuss the future of education and how we can make the education system far better than it is now, using technology and other ways, not just here in the UK or in the United States, but across the world. Education has been proven to be key to human development in so many ways. To start with, could you outline why education is so important for individuals and for societies to create the best possible outcomes?
Hi, thanks for having us. Yeah, so to answer your question simply, there's a direct corollary between a country's GDP and their test scores. So if you have high test scores, that country's going to probably have a high GDP. And conversely, if you have low test scores, you're probably going to have a low GDP. And I think it's less about the test scores themselves and just more about the mindset of learning, innovating, and investing in the future, investing in your people, investing in kids. And so for me, that's just a starting point. But really, it comes down to service towards kids, service towards the next generation of people. And at Tech My School, that is what we do. We are serving schools, we're serving kids because education is the foundation of society. It's the the one thing that is going to branch out into all sectors. And if students are given the opportunity to learn, grow, and are provided the right framework and structures by the adults who are in charge of them, they're going to have the best opportunity for themselves and for the future of that civilization, that country, that state. So, really, that's the goal, is just to provide the next generation with the best possible opportunities. And we believe every child deserves a world-class education. We start locally here, but we serve all around the world.
How does your organization help the poorest children to achieve better outcomes?
I think I think that kids when kids have access to the right materials, the right leadership models, the right mindset, um, then they have an opportunity to learn that they maybe wouldn't have had without that helping hand. So what we're helping schools to do is to really try and get the resources that they need into their hands so that they have an opportunity. Robby uses an analogy that I really like, that in the United States we have something that he calls the golden rope, which is like if you're in a if you grew up in poverty, or if you live in a kind of a rough part of town or something, if you have the willingness to work hard, in the West, we have this golden rope, right? You work hard enough, you can climb out. There's something there that gives you the opportunity to be able to improve your situation. So many parts of the world, the places where we work and the places where Robby and I have lived, um, there doesn't that structure doesn't exist for helping someone out in that way. So what we're really focused on trying to do is giving an opportunity to the schools and the kids who are interested in trying to improve themselves. We live in a world where there's an economy of information that's really run by technology in a large part. And so many of the schools that we serve, and in Puerto Rico specifically, but many of the schools that we serve worldwide, are schools that haven't ever really had access to the right tools or modern tools. And that includes not just hardware and software, but that also includes an updated mindset and an updated skill set. So that's really what we're trying to do, is to help provide to provide kids with opportunities to be able to help themselves.
Do you think this idea of meritocracy and social mobility is still valid today? Because it's clearly being eroded in so many parts of the world. People in poverty aren't able to rise up from their social position and become more wealthy and access more opportunity. How can education help to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, every country has its own cultural biases, rules, norms, etc. And I think there's always going to be a disparity of wealth. Some people are more geared towards acquiring wealth, striving for wealth, and they have other people who they have no interest at all in acquiring wealth or any sort of capitalistic gain. I have a brother who honestly would love to just do nothing all day, and he's totally happy with that. I have other friends who they can't sleep because they're thinking about the next big project, the next big thing, and what numbers in their bank account. They're trying to grow it. It's almost like a video game trying to get the highest score. So people are generally different, just in their composition, but at the same time, I think as the American kind of ethos goes, that pursuit of happiness should be able to exist in every country. So whether you want to be wealthy or not wealthy, that should be up to you. But I think whether you're wealthy financially or not, learning is different than that, in a sense that I can be very poor but very intelligent. I can read a ton of books, do a lot of experiential learning, speak 8 different languages, and make $25,000 a year. But then there's someone else who owns a couple gas stations who doesn't never graduated high school, who could be very wealthy. So I think really we want to provide a place where kids can aspire to be what they want to be, what their passions are, and can achieve those dreams. And education, of course, is that road to get there. And so whether people choose to take that road for money or for pleasure or for knowledge, it's entirely up to them, but that road should exist for everybody.
Education has become too focused on attaining a job or driving people towards one certain outcome. We need to reclaim the joys of education a lot more.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
So tell me about one of your success stories. How have you transformed a specific school or area, and what difference has that made?
So yeah, the story of Tech My School, the company Kyle and I both work for, the mission we serve is one of success, you could say. Kyle and I are both international educators. We've traveled and seen the world. We've lived in different continents, and we have context because growing up in the States, we have a context, and then working overseas and seeing how schools work globally, you have different contexts. And so when my wife and I first came to Puerto Rico, we were kind of shocked at the state of education in Puerto Rico. There's a certain standard we were expecting, that Puerto Rico being America, everyone here is an American citizen. You see the National Park Service, you see the USPS, you see Costco, you see all these things that are up to an American code, but then you also have education, the most important thing in a society, in my opinion. And it's not. It looked far closer to Nigeria, where I was coming from, my last post, than it did, California, where I grew up. And so that disparity really didn't sit well with me. And so I knew technology could help the schools. There's kind of a capacity gap here because everyone's American and the wages are so low here. If you're a really bright teacher, you can go and move to New York, Florida, Texas, Seattle, and you can make 2 to 5 times more money than you do here. And so because of that, there's a massive brain drain of teachers. And so thankfully, we're at this time now where teachers don't have to be the center or source of all knowledge. Programs like Khan Academy, Flint AI, there's these different tools that are available now where learning can become far more personalized, and the teacher can shift from this source of knowledge to more of a facilitator slash coach slash encouraging body or leader for teacher or for students. And so knowing this, I knew that we could make an impact. And so we started in 2021, going into a school, serving them, getting them new computers, softwares, and really I went from being a new parent to training all staff in that first month and then expanding from there. It wasn't a one school problem. It's a whole island-wide problem. And so that success happened when we founded these partnerships with schools and then reached out beyond ourselves and found additional partners. And, one of the first partners was working with Kyle at his school. He was working in Houston at the time at a very affluent private school, probably one of the top 3 schools in the state of Texas, which means it's one of the top 5 to 10 schools in the nation. And yeah, he really stepped in and supported us, and then we were able to kind of give back. So I'll pass the ball to Kyle so he can speak a little bit about his background and how he's helped make Tech My School a success.
Yeah, I would say one thing that's really interesting, Zaydan, is that even if we had unlimited resources, if we had unlimited money to spend, we still couldn't help every school. And the reason is actually because it requires a certain mindset from the leaders of those schools. Because we've had schools, you asked about a success story, but we've had schools that we help and we've gone in and we've provided them with computers, we've provided them with training, and they basically just kind of ignore us, or we'll say, they have this mindset of like, well, we kind of just wanted the free computers, we're not really interested in growing or getting better at what we do. So for me, working in a really affluent school, it was a fantastic school, and we had a cycle of our devices, right? Every 4 years we got new computers, and so we have to do something with our old computers. And before that, we were just kind of giving them to some e-waste recycling facility here in Houston. And I told Robby, hey, would it help you guys to have these computers? Because we had 25 or 30 computers at the end of every year that we had to donate. And so he said, sure. So he took them, and most of them were laptops, but then we had a few also like iMacs, like an all-in-one Mac computer. And he was able to build a computer lab at one school, was able to give all of the teachers at another school where they had never had computers. Now each of them had their own MacBook. And so what that really does is comes back to that accessibility piece, right? So like if those schools now have computers in them, now we can actually start to teach them how to use technology to empower their kids. And so I think the biggest successes involve access to the technology that we're talking about. And it doesn't have to be new technology. It doesn't have to be any particular type. It can be used Chromebooks, like some of the least expensive um, devices. But the kids are still able to learn this new skill set that we're trying to teach them so that they can actually compete in the global economy that we have right now.
What do you think the role of future technology should be in schools? Technology can pose a lot of risks in schools, especially because of the amount of influence that the companies can have on the way that education is conducted. A few years ago, there was some concern about Meta introducing some technology into schools where they were harvesting data from children and using them as potential future customers. How can such concerns be addressed and reduced while still integrating technology responsibly to improve education?
I mean, it's a great question. It's a great concept. And we'd love to say, big corporations are going to be unable to touch our students. They're not going to be able to use their data. And, we're going to shield them from the bad guys, let's just say. But what do students do the second they leave the school and go home? They're watching YouTube, they're online, they're connected, and they're on their phones. It's like if they're not getting it in the school, they're gonna get it, at home. But that's not to say we don't have a responsibility to protect their data. What concerns me more about child data is not them becoming potential customers, but more so with their security of their mental health, the security of their physical being. There's a lot of predators out there. There's a lot of bad people out there. Teaching them how to be financially literate and to not get scammed. Those kinds of threats I think are a little more realistic and personal for me. I think big tech is going to get their data one way or the other, but I think if we can teach them to, you know, understand the concept of like a nice balance of tech, not going overboard, being on a device 12 days in a row during a vacation and getting outside and like playing and running around and stuff. I think that's far more important than worrying if, Facebook or Meta is going to get their data, because the kids are going to give it to them probably anyways when they join a social media. So at least for me, like my biggest concern with data protection is like, deep fakes with AI, uh, and child's just avoiding predator scams, dangers, those kinds of things.
I think
I
I would
think the
add one
ultimate
thing would be the policy piece with schools. So schools do have a big role to play in this, and they need to be proactive in staying up to date with current threats, right? The current threat landscape, and then developing policies that are sensible, that make sense, not draconian and, no internet, no access. And some schools actually go down that road, but I think what they need is they need thought partners a lot of times. They need people who are doing this full time and thinking about safety in kids and schools, and not every school is currently wired. They don't necessarily have all of the right pieces in place, especially the underfunded schools that we work with. They may not have a person like Robby or I in a role that can help, consult with them on how to make these decisions. So I mean, that's one of the roles we play too, is just helping schools to understand the current threat landscape and help them to develop policies that make sense.
I think there also needs to be a cultural shift at home as well. Like parents need to have a more responsible grip of this and not allow children to access these technologies and these social media sites so early in their lives. But I
Mhm.
want to move on to something else about the classroom environment. How do you think that the classroom environment needs to change? Throughout the world, we've maintained the same Victorian style of education, rows of students lined up behind each other, facing forward as if they're enslaved and imprisoned within the classroom. My view is that education can never improve without a radical change in the classroom environment to encourage more comfort, engagement, and debate. What's your perspective on that?
I'll let you take this one, Kyle, but I just want to just quickly say I just watched a podcast with Mackenzie Price. She is the founder of Alpha School. And so she's kind of created a model that tries to tackle this exact topic that you're trying to hit on, which is how do we personalize schools and maximize today's needs and mindsets rather than adopting and continuing with this Victorian model. But Kyle, go ahead and take this
Yeah.
away.
I think the first one has to do with the physical classroom itself. So you mentioned desks in a row, and that's problematic because it's fixed, and it really only lends itself to one or two sort of styles of teaching, which typically are very teacher centric and not student focused.
Like
So
lecturing.
yeah, like lecturing. One of the first things I would advise a school to do is think about flexible seating. You need seating where the chairs are not attached to the desks. You need to have desks or tables that are mobile, that can be moved. Because when you're in a classroom environment, you want the kids to be able to engage in a lot of different types of activities. And if they're going to collaborate with one another in some instances, but then they're going to work solo on, maybe research or some other piece, you're constantly needing to be able to move around the way that the room is physically set up. So I would say that is the number one thing would be the physical environment. But then the second piece is actually the mindset. So what you described in this kind of old school schooling, and unfortunately it hasn't changed much over the past 150, 200 years. We've still got this, you walk into any given school, and you might see desks in a row. The other piece is sort of from a pedagogical standpoint, meaning like the ways in which we think about teaching kids and the ways we think about learning. If your school is set up where you're basically just handing out worksheets and kids are working alone at their desks, and then the teacher asks questions, the kids raise their hands, they answer questions. You're not accessing sort of these additional modalities of teaching that are available to you. And so it really comes down to teaching practice. And when you were talking about globally, schools of thought, I think Western schools of thought um, typically have moved in the last 20 years to this what we call student-centered model, where we as a teacher, I am not the owner of the information, and my job is to transfer information to you. My job is really to facilitate a learning environment where I'm going to create. I'm still in charge and still leading the learning experience, but the learning experience is designed ahead of time, and my job is to facilitate that experience. I'm One way that they say in education is it used to be a sage on the stage, but now we're looking for a guide on the side. So the focus is not the teacher as the holder of information now. So physical structure, and then actual pedagogical mindset. And then the third thing I would say is visionary leadership. You cannot have any of this happen. You're not going to change your facilities, and you're not going to change the way that you operate if you don't have visionary leaders who have fundamentally bought into a new way of thinking, a paradigm shift. Because most leaders that are in charge of schools right now are old enough that they were raised in an environment that was more or less pre-technology, at least pre-technology integration, and they grew up in desks and rows. And they say we do to us, or we do to them what was done to us, right? So it is right now. It's a really important time for people who grew up one way. Look, I'm 45 years old. I grew up in desks, in rows, in, I don't know, one of the more forward thinking educational countries in the world. Not the most, but definitely up there, right? The United States, where I grew up. It's We have a lot of great universities here. We have a lot of great research facilities. We do a lot of this thinking. And unfortunately, even in education, when we're trained as teachers, hey, this is the new way of thinking, you go into a school and it's actually the old way of operating. And there's a mismatch fundamentally. So leadership is absolutely essential to this.
How do you think the school curriculum needs to change alongside this? Should there be more practical skills and financial literacy? I think particularly important thing is political literacy, educating people about the realities of politics and the economy, because this vacuum that's there currently creates a space for malevolent forces to push people towards extremes. I think that is really necessary to change the curriculum and provide this education. What other forms of thinking should we be teaching?
Yeah, I think it's you got to understand that school isn't designed by the government to create these free thinking, free spirited, let's maximize potential and intelligence in people so they can live out their best life. Like
And that's
those,
part of the problem.
that's the message we think that is the point of school. But when it comes to who is funding this school, this public education, it's for a reason. We're trying to create citizenry, and a good citizen is one who is compliant. A good citizen is someone who isn't necessarily financially savvy, just someone who can just go in there, do their job, pay their taxes, and smile and wave at the politician. So knowing that as its base, you have to ask yourself, like, who is funding the schools, and then why are they funding these schools? Now, if you're talking about private education, that's a different matter. I mean, you can go, and that's a reason too why a lot of these kids who graduate from various private schools, they have a leg up on public school kids, is because those private schools don't have to abide by the exact same scruples that a public school does. That's conformism, this kind of one size fits all model. And you can have private schools that are specialized or themed in something entrepreneurial, something that is spiritual, something that is, however that mission is for that school. So you're exactly right in wanting and thinking and being. I'm just going to assume that there's a frustration with why school today isn't this utopian model for human excellence, rather than something that's designed to serve its purpose, which is governments are paying for schools for the common man so they can become a better citizen and a more compliant citizen. But yeah, I mean, you bang your head into the wall thinking about it and working within these systems, because you want to create that environment for kids. I remember my freshman year of college working with a professor, and when I knew I wanted to be a teacher. And so in his class, he was mentioning the fact that, like, you are not building these free thinking people. You're building these compliant robots essentially for the government. And if you get hired to a public school institution and you defame, let's say you're in the United States, you defame the United States, you drum up any kind of civil negative discourse, you can be put in jail for that, because your job, and you have to, like, sign on the dotted line basically saying, I will uphold the Constitution, I will uphold the rules and regulations of the state, I will ensure that I'm creating these good, obedient students. And so that's why a lot of kids, when they go from public school into university, they become a bit radicalized, because they're like, hey, wait a minute, I've just spent 12 years of my life learning the world and life is this one way. And now that I'm in this private university where you can freely discuss topics and talk about things that are like, how the world really is, you're telling me that all this was a sham and that we're being, manipulated to conform to be subservient to this government that's tyrannical. That's not okay. I'm going to go outside and protest. And that's why you see in the university systems in America, so much of this free thinking slash, civil disobedience, if you will, because this is the first time you're hearing, seeing, and feeling, this narrative. And it's not everybody, not everyone goes to college. So again, I don't know what the exact number is, but let's say 25%, 50% of people are in college, the other half aren't.
I think there's a
I,
lot of inherent inefficiencies too, because it's a government-run endeavor. You have a lot of great people. Burnout's a huge problem in the United States, and I know this is actually a thing in other places as well. But I think on average, what do they say, 5 or 6 years is the average teacher career. And part of the reason is that they're just beat to death with bureaucracy and paperwork and all the things that when you go into the profession, what you're thinking about is that connection with kids. You're thinking about interacting with these kids and being an agent of change and thinking about like, I really want to support this democratic society with these values. And you know you go into it, I think, with rose-colored glasses a lot of times, and the people that get kind of chewed up and spit out are the ones who had such a hard time with the fact that you don't have as much face time with kids as you would want. And so because of the state regulations and standardized testing and all these things that you're beholden to, that are like performative measures that are in some ways very, very difficult to achieve success at and feel good about the amount of time and when what you're actually, helping kids to learn, they we're just losing people out of the profession because it's so demoralizing. That being said, one thing that I absolutely love are veteran teachers who still have somehow, like, after kind of going through this meat grinder, they still have this spark to them. They still have this kind of glimmer in their eye that you can see that they're in it for they played the long game. They're there for kids. They're there to help kids, and they take the bureaucratic piece of the job and they kind of just push that aside. They still do it, they still comply, but they're able to like compartmentalize and say, hey, the like 50% of my job where I'm doing the things that I thought I was going to be doing, it's worth it. I will, I'll go through the bureaucratic nightmare of public education so that I can continue to really have an impact on kids' lives. And teachers are special people. They're we say education is so important, but yet we pay it lip service, especially in this country. We don't pay teachers enough. We've hardly given them a living wage compared to other industries, and yet we say they're helping our kids to become the future that we want them to be. I don't. That's a total ethical mismatch to me, and a head scratcher.
I think you've highlighted two problems here. One problem is that teachers are very underpaid, but yet they're overloaded with a lot of work. That's the first problem. And the second problem is corporate capture. Corporate capture is the reason why the government's priorities are distorted, so that they're prioritizing one certain way of molding the education system, is because of the lobbying that's going on behind the scenes to make the system shape in a certain way. And that is also a thing in the main education system below the university level, private finance contractors that run schools. And this means that the education system is distorted to have a certain lens of thinking. And it is a problem here as well that in private schools, they don't have to follow the same curriculum as public schools. And that widens the disparity even further. But I wanted to ask you about exams and what you think about them. Are they still a successful metric of judging success and determining what pathway someone should take after they've completed their education?
Yeah, I think when it comes to assessment, and just demonstration of skills, I think one of the fundamental flaws of our current system is that we're still trying to look for indicators that were designed, let's say 50, 100 years ago, and the world doesn't look the same. So, for example, if we have kids who are spending an enormous amount of time learning how to maximize AI prompts, developing apps, software, music. They're being creative, and they're really preparing themselves for, this informational economy, this AI economy. How are their standardized test scores going to be compared to someone who was in an old school book, knowledge centered, rote memorization, drill and kill school, where all they're trying to do is maximize test scores? And so, which one's going to be more prepared for the world? Which one is not? You have to also look at the incentive structures. Schools are getting money from the government, from whomever, because those test scores are high. But again, what do those test scores really indicate in an AI economy? I mean, LLMs know so much more. I'm not saying you can't use that knowledge to base into other things, but it's like if you're spending all your time standardizing your learning and structuring your learning towards remembering facts, you're not going to be as successful as someone who's been maximizing the latest trends, tools, and economics, finances, and that's just kind of the dilemma we're stuck in. Schools are a feeder for university, and university are still looking for these standardized tests rather than a portfolio of great artifacts that indicate an understanding of what's actually important in the world today, not 50 years ago.
So how
So
specifically do you think we should assess people?
I think that so many things have changed over the last 30 or 40 years. One of the things that had started becoming more and more important, I think, specifically to your kind of thinking about test scores being kind of myopic in a sense, like test scores are just an incomplete assessment of a student, right, and their abilities and what they know. Um, Students have always been asked to give for university entrance. They've always been asked to give some sort of a narrative piece about themselves, their lives, their experiences, and they'll give the colleges will give a prompt for students to answer. Hey, write 600 words about this thing, right? And it would give a student a chance to, I think, really display their exceptionality in ways other than what their scores are on those tests. And yes, their skills as writers is part of that, um, which you could argue is just, again, straight up academic. But the onset of LLMs in 2023 in the fall, when they became really easily accessible online, um, that process became problematic because so many students are using the LLMs to write their entrance essays now. As the tech gets better, it becomes harder and harder to distinguish what is AI generated, what's human generated. But if you think about it from the school's perspective, a university trying to accept students, they now have a situation where they look a little bit sideways at any written thing that comes in now. Did the student actually produce this themselves? And unfortunately, what that has done is probably forced even greater weight on the standardized test scores, because the standardized tests are still pretty unadulterated metric of what they were intending to gauge, right? I I don't I don't know that I have any easy answers for how they should be going about gauging who gets in, who doesn't get in. Um, I think that okay, so to take this to industry, the job market has changed also, because the same thing happens in the job market now. Cover letters, by and large, written by AI, right? So if you're an employer and you're looking for an employee coming in, you are now getting flooded with a massive number of applications because we have AI tools that can make applying for jobs much easier. And you can take a job description, customize your resume and your cover letter for that specific job, and you can do it really quickly. And so people who are hiring are getting flooded with more and more garbage, basically, because it kind of makes everybody look the same, and yes, you can't fake unless you're just a liar. I mean, you can't fake the experience as part of it, but the way that you can use these tools to sort of spin your experience is both impressive and also a little bit disingenuous, right? The same thing happens at university with their enrollment. So they are getting bombed with far more applications, but they're still going to have, and actually in the United States, the universities in the United States, last I read, they're actually they have fewer kids enrolling in college but far more applying. So they're having to go through this, horrible process where they either need a longer period of time, or they need more people, or they need better tools to be able to suss out who the actual kids are that they want in their university. I think that, yeah, I'm probably just identifying something it's a really difficult thing to even kind of wrap your head around the solutions for.
They should use
I
smart.
recognize it's really hard to replace exams because of how pure a metric they are of determining who is successful and who is supposedly intelligent. But I also think that the universities and employers are both adapting. There's an increasing emphasis on the interview process, both for
Mm,
universities and for employers. But more specifically here in the UK, there's a lot of shift towards reasoning based assessments that assess critical thinking. For example, Oxford University has a thinking skills assessment. UCL has the Tara test for admissions that is based on academic reasoning and
mm.
intelligence, like pure intelligence.
Yeah, and I think actually we use the measures of academic progress the map test. We use that with a lot of our schools, and it's that technology it's really helpful because it's adaptive, right? So like if we have students who will start taking the test and they probably all get the same question first. If you get the question right, it's going to take you maybe to a different place than if you get it wrong, and it kind of is assessing your level of knowledge on all these different areas, basically kind of like a choose your own path sort of an exam. And so in that sense, like, standardized tests have actually gotten a little bit better as they've been able to utilize the technology that allows them to be adaptive.
Okay, I just wanted to talk finally about early intervention in education. It's proven to be very effective for improving educational outcomes if you intervene early in the system, whether that's early years or nursery. Here in the UK, we had an initiative called Sure Start, which were centers that supported parents to help raise their kids in a more effective way and provided them with parenting support and resources as well. How do you think early intervention can be used to help improve educational outcomes across the system from the beginning to the end?
There's something that's called the first five. So the first 5 years of your development or of your life are the most instrumental in terms of like your lived outcomes. And yeah, I think for my own, I have two boys. They're a little bit older now. They're 13 and 11. But I remember with them growing up, when they're at their infancy, there was this kind of debate of like, do I introduce technology or not? And then if you do that, how can you tastefully / safely integrate it? And I can only go from my own, personal experience with my own children. But essentially, what I ended up doing was I created a device, an iPad, that essentially became a learning machine where everything within that iPad was learning based. So they could do math problems, they could read, they could play with shapes, they could listen to videos that were educational, they could, make music sounds with the little keyboard or art sets or whatever. And so what I found when structuring it like that, it kept them away from consuming knowledge to creating and producing knowledge. And their brains got tired. So they would pick up the iPad, they would play with, the math thing until their brain kind of hurt. Like they would learn sounds and colors and letters, and then they would put it down and they'd go and play with the car or blocks or whatever. And there are apps that are designed that I think can do an even better job than a human can in terms of skill acquisition. For example, there's one app that's called the Endless Letters. And so with Endless Letters, is when kids are first learning those developmental foundations of literacy. They've got, the letter C, for example. So there'll be a C, and on the screen there's a C, and then on the tablet they're tapping the C or holding the C, and it'll go C, K, C, K. Now I can do that with a flashcard. Hey son, this is a C, and this is the sound it makes, K, K, K. I'm only going to do that like 3 times before I'm frustrated. I can't do it. My patience is run thin. They could have a headset on, be playing with the letter C for 30 minutes, hearing it reinforced multiple times over, and really grasping that understanding because it took them that long. And it's personalized because they're going through the letters at their brain's kind of speed. And so I think it did a better job of building their literacy than it did when I worked one-on-one with them. And the result of it was both my sons are, doing very well in school and, top of their class and all that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying it's entirely because of that. I think it's a combination of many things, but I think there's a place for technology and maximizing the tools that are available. I think the younger you go, though, the more of the human element is going to be required, just because we can't code or program out our evolution. Young, small creatures like to grasp onto the mom or the dad or whatever, the parental figure. Kindergartners like to hug. Preschoolers like to hug. You know what I mean? And so hugging an iPad isn't the same as hugging the teacher or their friend or whatever. So I think the younger the student is, the more of the human element's going to be there. And then as they grow older, then humans are, that human interaction is very important, but it's, okay, I would say less essential in terms of the learning component as their brains develop.
I would say the number one thing you said, early intervention, is reading. As much reading. If you're going to invest in anything, I know funds are limited when you're a young parent. Invest in books and get the kids reading. It was interesting. Robby and I, we get to play Santa Claus sometimes, right? Where we go into a school and we're giving out things, iPads or computers or whatever. That's fun. That's not the most impactful part of our job, but it is fun to go in and do that. There was a story from just a couple of months ago. Actually, I should let Robby tell it. But essentially, like, we brought them all this stuff, and I wasn't there for this one, but brought them all this stuff. But what were they the most excited about, Robby?
They were most excited about the books, the tangible books that they could hold and see the pictures and share with their friends and all that. I mean, they loved the tech too. That was great, but
Yeah.
they jumped immediately on the books. And I think, sadly, I mean, that's part of the reason why Tech My School is just the fact that there aren't public libraries in Puerto Rico. Schools don't have robust libraries themselves. Classroom libraries are anemic, if they have them at all. So there's just definitely a need for that literacy and to build on those skills.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exposure
that
to
just showed
language
how
is very
everything
important.
is quite interconnected regarding all of this. That if the government doesn't fund libraries, then there'll be little access to reading. So it's all interconnected like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exposure to language is one of the most important things for brain development for kids in that first 5 years. So that includes hearing language as well. So there was a study done about single parent families versus two parent families. And no, this is not like, if you are a single parent, you probably would not choose to be a single parent if you had another option. But a single parent family in poverty, where that single parent is working two jobs, the child is hearing by, I think it's in the first 2 years or something, 10 million words. They're exposed to 10 million words. Whereas a two-parent family, where they're not having to work two jobs, they're home with the kid more, they are eating meals together, that kid is exposed to 30 million words by the same period of time. So, like, 3 times the exposure to language. And so in the United States, we have a really well documented problem with early childhood learning being playing a huge part into like determining how students are going to do, whether they graduate high school, and then how well they do, sort of, their financial outlook. And it tracks almost exactly with the kids who did not get that early childhood learning piece formalized. They have far, far worse outcomes. It's really hard. So that's the exposure to language, and a big part of that is reading. So, and you can say, my kid's 18 months old, they can't read. Why would I give them books with words? That's how they learn. They have to be looking at them. They have to be seeing them. So, but then you need to read to them too. We need to be reading to our kids as much as we can.
I still read to my kids. I read to them last night.
But not because they
you.
can't read.
Thank you so much for your time. Could you please let us all know where can people support your work and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so Tech My School, we didn't touch too much into it, but Tech My School, we're an educational nonprofit. We go into schools, we create audits, we create tech plans for schools, and then we help them fulfill those plans. Modernizing education, we look at systems, we look at capacity building, we look at student empowerment, and for any of those schools or potential parents who have kids in schools that care about education, they can find us at techmyschool.org, and we can start there, info@techmyschool.org. We'd love to help you guys, to help modernize your school, and to help create a plan for you. And we have a number of different programs, softwares. We do a big educator conference in the Caribbean in April. So yeah, techmyschool.org is where you can find us. Kyle?
Yeah, I would just, the only thing I would add is that if you're a school, if you're an educator listening, or you have your kids in a school that you think might be interested in this, because we're a nonprofit, we act as a philanthropic arm for educational software companies. So we resell software at huge discounts, and we've created an equity-based pricing system. So the more money, essentially, the less money you charge your students, or the less affluent the area where the school is, then the bigger discounts we're able to extend to you. In some cases, getting software for 80% off, 90% off, depending on your school.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for watching and listening. This has been Mission Undercover, and I hope to see you all next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sinan.